Ryan, welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. Live picture there at the White House. So we want to dive into the fallout that continues due to the very contentious, fraught meeting between Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump in the Oval Office on Friday. So much so that Zelensky traveling to European capitals, including London, meeting with some of these European leaders to talk about the path forward. This coming after the news we brought you just tonight. That the Trump administration is planning to pause all U.S. military aid to Ukraine here. In the meantime, Fox's Kevin Corke has more on this from Washington. Let's listen.
A senior White House official tells Fox News the U.S. will pause all military aid to Ukraine until the Ukrainians show a stronger commitment to working out a peace deal. This as European leaders try to carve out their own path toward a ceasefire, with Britain and France leading the charge. The UK's Prime Minister says he's open to sending troops to Ukraine to help keep the peace.
Britain will play a leading role, with, if necessary, and together with others, boots on the ground and planes in the air.
Both countries acknowledge the U.S. would likely still be needed as a part of a peacekeeping effort to ensure that a truce holds. That would, however, require a reset of U.S.-Ukraine relations after Friday's disastrous Oval Office meeting. The White House says it expects an apology from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has tried to keep open the door to repairing the relationship.
He's in a very difficult position. The war is not going well for Ukraine.
This weekend, Zelensky said he thinks a peace deal is still a long way away. That comment not sitting well with President Trump.
He better not be right about that. And if somebody doesn't want to make a deal, I think that person won't be around very long.
Amid the uncertainty, European leaders are looking to ramp up their own defense spending. In fact, the EU is set to hold an emergency summit on that very topic this coming Thursday. In Washington, I'm Kevin Corke, Fox News.
Kevin, thanks so much. In the meantime here, we want to bring into the conversation right now national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer there, Hal Kempfer. He joins me. Hal, good to see you here. Hope you had a good weekend. There's a lot to get to. First, your reaction to this. Zelensky had said on Friday night, speaking with Bret Baier, that he thought the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine, between Trump and himself, is salvageable. Does the Trump White House think that? Does Trump think that with this announcement tonight?
Andrew, I kind of get the sense that the White House is kind of trapped into it in its own response to what happened on Friday. Like anything else, when you have something like that, everybody's going to try and spin it one way or the other. And the White House, obviously spun it in a way that didn't make, Vice President Vance or the president or, President Trump look bad. And but now you're kind of stuck. You've said all these things about President Zelensky. I will say on the other side, President Zelensky has been nothing but very flattering to the White House and President Trump and everything, and saying that we can fix this, and he has nothing but respect, for President Trump and certainly for what the U.S. provides and everything. So. Yeah. I get the sentiment that this is that that the White House is kind of gone down this track. But the other thing too, when I looked at this today, I'm going to say first off, not unexpected.
Oh,
there'd been signals that something like this could happen for quite some time. Even before that Oval Office meeting, it was pretty clear that the White House pretty much had in mind that they were going to suspend or do something with the aid, and maybe we're fortunate that they didn't do it sooner. But there was a sense that that was going to happen. The other one is this is just hardball. It's arm twisting to get President Zelensky to do something very visible, which will provide at least a something will look like success in terms of this particular tactic. So I don't know how long this will last. I honestly, I just don't know.
I mean, Trump White House officials are describing this to us at Fox that this is temporary. And that this is just a pause, although pauses can be indefinite, so we'll just have to wait and see. Hal, I wanted to ask this, too, because there's been a slew of headlines about some of the carrots we're offering to Russia, not necessarily the sticks. to Russia. I want to go through some of those here. This from Reuters, that the U.S. is drawing up a plan to potentially give Russia sanctions relief as President Trump seeks to restore ties with Moscow and stop the war in Ukraine. According to officials to Reuters, Hal, the White House has asked the State and Treasury Departments to draft a list of sanctions that could be eased for U.S. officials to discuss with Russian representatives in the days ahead here. Also, this over the weekend that's now being denied by this very agency, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Hal. They say this: CISA's mission is to defend against all cyber threats to U.S. critical infrastructure, including from Russia, saying there's been no change in our posture, saying any reporting to the contrary is fake and undermines our national security. I find this part kind of odd because the reporting was that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth himself had said that all cyber operations against Russia would cease here. So, Hal, we're talking about Ukraine and Russia. Who's to blame? Who needs to put more on the table to get these settlement talks jump-started? And I talk about a lot of carrots seemingly going to Russia, the sticks going to Ukraine. This coming as several of the Trump administration figures and officials, including President Trump himself, they keep saying how that Zelensky doesn't want this war to end, that Zelensky wants to keep this war going. Are they making those assertions in bad faith here? And if so, what does Zelensky mean by saying the war can't end right now?
Well, what Zelensky's basically saying is, the battle lines are not set. There's still a fierce battle going on out there. And the other problem is, every time they talk about this, there's the two issues are, what peace is it going to look like? Where are the lines going to be delineated? And Russia's position is that they want to take complete control of all the oblasts where they have any presence, and and that includes all of the Donbass. And of course, the Ukrainians are fighting fiercely to keep the Russians at bay in the Donbass, and they're not inclined to pull their forces out and just hand over those cities, towns, and that countryside over to Russia, which is what Russia wants. Obviously, what Russia really wants is to take over all of Ukraine and incorporate it into Russia, but that's what they want. The other side, too, is he says that he keeps bringing up these security guarantees. They have had multiple agreements with Russia not to invade, not to threaten Ukraine, and then the paper's not worth what's written on it. It's these documents don't mean anything. You have to back it up with force of arms. You have to back it up with a physical military presence on the ground to deter Russia from doing that. And that's what is completely undone in all of this. It's not just peace. It's what is that peace going to do, and is it just going to give Russia time to regenerate forces and get ready to reconstitute, to go in there to do another big assault like they did in February of 22. So that's kind of what I think he's alluding to. Now, if I could reference that last part with the CISA memo, CISA is part of the Department of Homeland Security. They're not part of the Department of Defense. So whatever Pete Hegseth sent out to DOD, to Cyber Command, to NSA, within Department of Defense has nothing to do with DHS. And CISA's job, they don't do any offensive operations against any country. Their job is strictly defensive. So there may be some stuff out there. I haven't really been tracking to see what people are saying in the blogosphere or the cyberspace that CISA is somehow doing something to stop offensive operations or whatever. That's just not their mission. That's not what they do. They're strictly a security organization. So when they say, look, whatever else is being said, there's been no change in their posture, I can't imagine there would be a change in their posture, because that's just simply not what they do. That doesn't apply to CISA.
All right. Thank you for that clarification there, Hal, because that was somewhat confusing over the weekend about, cyber operations against some of this Russian cyber warfare. In the meantime, though, let's get back to the pausing of all U.S. military aid to Ukraine here. We still don't know whether it would include already appropriated funding for Ukraine. And that's somewhat been a battle royale within the Trump White House, so to speak, and a whole host of agencies pausing federal funding that has already been appropriated by Congress here. So that remains to be seen. But what is this going to look like going forward? Do you anticipate that it will have deleterious impacts on the battlefield in the short term for Ukraine or not?
In the short term, like the next week or two, I don't imagine it's going to have much impact at all. I don't know where everything is in terms of what's being shipped and stuff, but I don't think it's going to have a really big effect. What I do think is if it starts to stretch out over weeks, you will start to see certain things come up short. As it is, there's a number of things that are coming up short simply because we just don't have them in the inventory. You know, a good example is 203 millimeter mortar rounds, essentially large projectiles. We didn't have many of those, period. I mean, we don't use them anymore. I think Greece had a few, and they may have some that they can send. But there are certain things that, you know, the warehouses just don't have a lot of. So that was something that was this one effect. What I'm hearing about this suspension, initially when it came out, it sounded like if something was underway, if it was already moving towards Ukraine, such as on a ship or in a plane or whatever, and didn't actually have to be in Ukraine proper, but if it was just underway, that they would continue to keep that going.
Okay.
Now, there were some officials that said, no, it's only going to be if it's in Ukraine. So it had to have crossed the border. Once it's in Ukraine, then it will continue. However, it's going to get to its final destination. That's still a little unclear as to what that is. But one thing I will say, and that's probably the whole intent, is to prod the Europeans to do something to compensate very quickly in the short run. And that's probably part of the thinking here, which is, hey, the Europeans are already moving this direction. Let's just give them another nudge to move them right along. And this is one heck of a nudge.
Yeah, we're going to hear from UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer in just a moment when we're done speaking with you. But aside from all of what we've just been discussing about the very tenuous, fragile relationship now between Trump and Zelensky, there were some glimmers that parties involved were trying to salvage it and put the pieces back together. And I want to put up this tweet here from Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican of Pennsylvania. He said this: I just had a lengthy and productive one-on-one conversation with President Zelensky's chief of staff, Andrei Yermak. He says, we're 100% getting this train back on the tracks. He says this mineral deal will be signed in short order, which will lead to a strong long-term economic partnership between the United States and Ukraine, and which will ultimately and naturally lead to security assistance, saying Europe will be required to step up and do its part, and there will be mandates for them to do just that. Stay tuned for further details. Also, Trump today in the White House kind of leaving the door open for the minerals deal to get back on track here. Zelensky in Europe and in London over the weekend. So was the weekend used for all parties involved, Hal, to let tensions simmer and let bygones be bygones? It seemed like the weekend was used for that at least.
You know, when we were talking about this on Friday, it was that was my sense, was there was going to be a cooling off period, that they would kind of let this simmer down. Of course, the big thing was what was going to come out of the Sunday meeting with the European leaders, which was very interesting to see what was said there. And it was very positive, very supportive for Zelensky. But I think the big thing that I heard today was that President Trump said he thought the mineral deal would get done. And now and the Fitzpatrick tweet came out, or X, whatever you want to say, came out, and it pretty much said the same thing, which was that the Ukrainians feel this is going to be done. And you wouldn't hear the president of the United States and the chief of staff of the president of certainly Ukraine saying these things so assuredly if there hadn't been a lot of staff work done in between. And I imagine there was a lot of communication back and forth. And what they're going to do is just kind of let this simmer, maybe die down for a bit. And probably there will be something that gets the aid turned back on. I don't know what that will be. That gets the aid turned back on, but gets the flow going. But once they get that into effect, then they'll sign it. I don't know if there's going to be a meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump in the Oval Office again. In fact, I would think they might want to avoid that particular optic if they can. But I do think it's going to get probably done. And then one thing I would mention too, the minerals deal and the aid are not separate issues. The minerals deal makes the United States a stakeholder in the economic security and the success of Ukraine as a sovereign nation state. That's kind of a big deal because that goes directly to making sure that over $50 billion of aid that Congress has allocated that has not been sent yet keeps flowing.
Okay.
Doesn't have to go back. $50 billion, you can space that out for quite some time. Doesn't have to go back to Congress, but just keeps flowing. That on top of all the things that are coming from the Europeans and potentially what could come from the frozen Russian assets if they're seized or used in some other way to fund the war. Ukraine could be actually sitting pretty good. And by the way, I want to differentiate. I want to differ with what one of the commentators said in that segment before. Ukraine is not losing this war. There's a narrative that they're losing. They're actually doing quite well.
Now, President Trump, though, says Ukraine doesn't have the cards. I mean, that's essentially saying they're losing the war, Hal.
I heard him say that. And if you get onto the battlefield dynamics, they're doing very well. Russia's a big country. They got a lot of folks, but hey, Ukraine has more tanks on the battlefield. They got more troops on the battlefield there. The Russians are taking phenomenal losses. They make these marginal, pretty much insignificant gains. They take a village that, frankly, I was talking to a friend of mine who used to be a defense attaché over there. We go, they make a big deal. They go, oh, they took the strategic village. And we all look at it, we go, when was that ever a strategic village? Okay. That was just a little village in Ukraine. And they do it at phenomenal losses. And the bottom line is Russia can't keep this up. So, yes, both countries have challenges, but Russia's got huge challenges.
Now, the argument, though, from the Trump White House would be, I'm going to just kind of echo it, that Russia can absorb that because they have nuclear weapons, they have a lot of people, they're a meat grinder, they don't care that their young boys and young men are going to fight this war, many of them dying, and that Ukraine can't absorb it. They have been able to for now 3+ years, but without security guarantees from the U.S. and Europe, they won't be able to absorb it, much like Russia. Do you buy that argument?
I've heard that argument for 3 years straight.
Okay.
That's the Kremlin's been putting that out all the time. It says, hey, we're a big country. We got to, that's the Russian myth that they got this bottomless mass of humanity that they can throw at wars. And the truth is that they tend to be very wanton in terms of how they use troops in war. They have a long history of getting troops needlessly killed in very poorly conceived military operations. And they're definitely keeping that up in spades on this one. But the truth is they are starting to have serious manpower problems. Okay. I'm not saying Ukraine does not have manpower problems. They do. But they've also got some very serious fundamental economic problems. And that's where Putin, despite all of his pushing back, trying to get as much as he can, right now Putin's big concern is if the war ends, depending on how it ends, if it ends in a way that's satisfying to Ukraine, his political fortunes are not looking very good within Russia. So he's very much well aware of that.
Okay.
He wants it to end in a way to declare victory.
So, Hal, just lastly, briefly here, after the Zelensky-Trump meeting, has the dust settled, or are the reverberations still being felt, or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's still pretty dusty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think there's some more settling to be done.
Gotcha.
I think that what I am hearing, though, is, get past the dust, get past the smoke, if you will. And what you see is there's a foundation for this deal to get done. I don't know when that will happen. Yeah. Would it happen this weekend? Would it happen next week? Or I don't think it's going to take forever. And, you might see like a week-long pause. And I got to tell you, with all the stuff this administration does, a week is a really long time.
It is.
There's a lot of things that'll happen in a week that will divert our attention other directions. So there's a lot going on. And by the way, as a side note, there is a little something going on in the Middle East and Gaza right now, which is kind of unsettled, and that's going to get our attention here pretty soon as well.
That's right. Hal Kempfer, as always, can't thank you enough. We'll talk tomorrow.